RETOOLED is a first-person shooter by Swarm Creations. The game contains 10 levels that take place in a futuristic, abstract setting. It's an ideas-based game, focused on providing interesting mechanics to make the player feel satisfied. It doesn't try to coax you into a sense of accomplishment through an intimidating enemy roster or some kind of power fantasy. The game is squarely focused on getting you to understand the interactions between player movement, weapons, and what the game calls abilities. It tries to establish lanes into its fun zone by relying on the synergies within the player's toolkit. It manages this with varying degrees of success, and much of your own mileage with RETOOLED will hinge on how fun you think those tools are to use. What did I think though? Solid question, so let's find out. But before we get into it, I can say I was provided with a key, and this is sponsored content. That said, if you watch my streams on Twitch, you will know that I do not do glow-ups for keys. Enjoying it? Yeah, it's good. I enjoy reviewing games that I think have passion poured into them and where I hope I can give a useful perspective. We should first ground the review with the reality of how the game was built. RETOOLED has been developed by largely one person. A sterling effort for a single person really, especially considering that this is the first game published by Swarm Creations to Steam. There are contributions in art, music and voice by several others, but systems, design, programming and UI are largely the efforts of a single person. I share this with you for perspective's sake and to ground the commentary. RETOOLED is not a game built by several or more people working 8 hours a day, getting paid a salary. This is one person who has likely busted their chops over and above for months and years to realise an idea that was in their head. That said, I hope this review can provide some insight on what to expect from RETOOLED and provide useful feedback. So with all that said, let's hop into it and start by talking about the movement. RETOOLED has a very slick and satisfying movement system. In fact, the entire game feels responsive. Whether it's bunny hopping, dashing, the mouse input, or using abilities, everything feels just right. The player character also has just enough air control to ameliorate minor movement errors. Players new to the action FPS subgenre will easily be able to start hopping around, thanks to the inclusion of a hold to B-hop feature. Keen players, however, can also take advantage of rocket jumping to outmaneuver enemies. The movement has to be the strongest part of RETOOLED. This is important for any action FPS, but especially for RETOOLED, thanks to its style of resource management. You see, there's a synergy between movement and energy ammo. It's the first example of overlapping mechanics in the game. Creating synergies and interactions between the game's mechanics is a common theme in RETOOLED. The faster you move, the more energy you will have for your two plasma weapons. This design tries to invite players to make more nuanced choices about how best to navigate its combat, and it mostly works. There are several other examples of interesting ideas in RETOOLED, and it can get overwhelming at first. I recommend rereading the tutorials in the help section. Most of these tutorials are well put together, as they feature both video and written descriptions of how systems in the game work. I do wish there was a section in help about enemies, however, at least so I could get a hook to appreciate their individual roles further. I'm just not sure which part of the gameplay equation was conceived first for RETOOLED. It feels like the solutions were introduced first. Cool ideas that are fun to use. Take the ESD for example, a throwable that can be stood on to gain extra energy damage or fired at with an energy weapon to turn it into a grenade. The ESD invites the player to consider their position and that of the enemy. Based on that, you have to consider whether enemies are clumped up for a grenade or spread out. If they're spread out, you should stand on the ESD to get extra damage for your gun. You also have to stop in place to benefit from the ESD. So many decisions and trade-offs to be made in such little time. It's great, and what makes for exciting moment-to-moment combat. It's just a shame that making great decisions quickly doesn't mean that much in terms of your combat efficacy. Largely, this is the case because the enemies in RETOOLED aren't really disruptive enough. There is a sense of homogeny in the cast of enemies, and I'm not just talking about their appearance, although that doesn't help either. The individual threats and movement styles of the cast seem largely similar. This causes no single enemy on the chessboard to present as a pointed, complicating factor for the player. The art style, whilst clean and practical, also does not convey the character of the enemy. Are they smug, angry, cheeky, bullish? There are very limited exceptions to these problems. One I can recall being the cone-shaped robots that fire a continuous laser beam. Another being the pressure units with dual shields. Both units are fantastic because they prevent me from moving in any direction I prefer. I need to break line of sight or reroute, rethinking which way I am moving at any given point in time. It's disruptive to my goal as the player. I want to move around the space, uninterrupted and as fast as possible. But the moment I see these enemies, I'm already thinking about how to subtract them from the scenario. It's a shame there isn't more of this because it's great and not overly complex relative to other similar games. Unfortunately, there's a general sense that most units in the game will simply follow the player, rather than trying to cut them off or impede their movement. It gets to the point that I feel as though I am playing Kovac's aim trainer, it's just that I can move around more freely. The AI are there to be shot as I sail past them at light speed on my 12th lap of the arena. They can't slow me down or block me. Player movement is simply so strong and retooled that many other systems can be safely ignored, simply because the AI have very few hard counters to the player's movement. Despite all of this, we can see the game has some spot-on ideas in terms of overlapping the systems of the game to get players across all of them. You want more ammo? Start bunny hopping. Want more damage from your plasma weapons? Use the ESD. So how would I improve the game? Well, let's start with the weapons, namely the plasma rifle and the railgun. When you decide to stand on the ESD, it will overcharge both weapons, increasing their damage. This is okay, but what would have been even cooler is if overcharged energy altered how the weapon fired. For example, the plasma rifle, instead of being a projectile-based weapon like a nail gun, could have turned into a shorter range lightning gun. How about if the railgun took on a bullet bending quality, where slightly missing a shot caused bullets to turn and hit the nearest enemy? There's just so much more potential in Retooled for leaning further into the overlap between mechanics, but the game opts instead for percentage damage increases. I appreciate though that one does not simply add a variable bullet bending and set it to true. Building systems is hard, and Retooled should be considered in the context of which it was developed. One final suggestion I would make is to remove the melter gun, replacing it with a shotgun. In addition to that, you should reduce the damage of the rocket launcher and either decrease its cooldown or add an extra charge. The rocket jumping in this game is very fun, so contending with movement or doing damage with the rocket launcher was not altogether fun. And the melter gun just felt superfluous. Enemies are scripted to avoid it, it's very slow and just isn't fun to use. The influences in Retooled are obvious. It takes what Doom Eternal tried to do by creating a resource economy that is managed through equipment provided to the player. The more you leaned into that toolkit, the better you fared. There were, however, 2 occasions where I felt the game had overstepped the inspiration mark and leaned into a very different type of homage. I wasn't sure if this was an attempt to pay tribute, and it felt awkward to observe. Ultimately, would I recommend Retooled? Yes, but perhaps when it's discounted by roughly 15% or more. It leans into the idea that players will enjoy being effective in combat by learning its systems. However, its longer-term appeal is limited due to an overly uniform and simple enemy roster. I think Swarm Creations has passion and ideas, so I support them in saying you should try the game out. The movement in this game is well implemented and fun. It also runs extremely well. Again, I would like to thank Swarm Creations for providing me with the key so I can enjoy the game, cover it, and share it with everyone here and on Twitch. If you like this video, like it. If you didn't, leave a dislike or a comment, or join my Twitch stream and let me know in chat how I can do even better. Until next time, keep smiling, don't do anything I wouldn't do, and bye for now.